Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Marc Mercer. I teach in the philosophy department here at St. Mary's, and I'll moderate today's discussion on academic freedom for students. How free should the students be? The panelists are Russell Currie, Marc Heller, Ossama Nasrallah, and Lindsay Shepherd. Russell is a fourth-year philosophy honors student at St. Mary's, just about to finish his program. Marc has a bachelor's and a master's in philosophy, both from St. Mary's. He successfully defended his master's thesis on liberal education in August 2016. Ossama Nasrallah is a fourth-year marketing student in the Sobey School of Business. He is also currently the president of the St. Mary's University Students Association. Lindsay Shepherd has a BA in communication from Simon Fraser University, and she's now a master's student in cultural analysis and social theory at Wilfrid Laurier University. We have 3 university students and a recent university graduate here to speak to students and others about a matter that concerns students in their role as students. The panelists will speak in the order I've introduced them. Each has 8 minutes to state a position regarding the question, how free should the students be? I'll keep time, and I'll signal when there's 1 minute remaining. After they've all stated a position, each panelist will have 2 minutes to respond to what the others have said. The panelists will then take questions from members of the audience. I'll move the microphone into the aisle. I'd like to thank the 2 sponsors of our discussion, St. Mary's University and the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. The Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship is a national organization, now in its 26th year. Its mission includes to maintain freedom in teaching, research, and scholarship, and to maintain standards of excellence in academic decisions about students and faculty. I'd like particularly to thank Malcolm Butler, Vice President Academic and Research at St. Mary's, for generously providing the wine and cheese reception. Right after the session here, do come join us, 4th floor of the Sobeys building, for food and drinks, and to continue the conversation with our panelists.
Yeah, go ahead. You don't have a cold or anything, do you?
Now I do.
Yeah, you're right.
Our topic is broad and ill-defined. Each panelist will, of course, narrow it down to one of the two matters that concerns them most, but let me try to articulate the general issue. Freedom contrasts with constraint, the constraints of rules and policies backed up by sanctions and punishments, of course, but also the informal constraints of people's attitudes. Now, a student's life centrally involves classrooms and essays, but it involves much more. Formal and informal interactions with professors and other students, events both academic and social, art and music, campus newspapers, campus radio, the library, the cafeteria, clubs and societies, the hallways, the quad. I suppose the dorms fall on the side of home life and so are outside our discussion, but I'd be easy to persuade that they too count as places where students are still students. With each of these activities in each of these places comes rules and other constraints. The academic calendar contains both academic regulations and a student code of conduct. We have a Safe and Respectful St. Mary's initiative. The Students Association oversees student societies and student media, and it vets postings on university walls. University officials monitor social media to see what students are saying about their professors and classmates and how they are saying it. Professors direct their teaching assistants. Those who favor minimal rules and minimal oversight in one or another area of student life and endeavor tend to say that rules and oversight get in the way of self-expression and self-determination, and moreover tend to slow down the development in students of intellectual and moral autonomy. An intellectually and morally autonomous individual is one who believes and values for her own good reasons, and not out of fear of punishment or out of expectation of reward. If a university is to be a place at which students may develop into intellectually and morally autonomous people, then a university must be a place of freedom for students, even if students will sometimes use their freedom poorly. Freedom from constraint does not, of course, mean freedom from criticism. Those who say false or pernicious things or say what they say in a rough way can be criticized for doing so and shown better ways. In a place of freedom, when people reform their views or manners, they do so because they accept reasons for doing so, and not because they must or else fear punishment or sanction. Now, those, on the other hand, who favor strong rules and effective oversight worry about the effects on others of what students say and do. Certain views, even certain discussions, can belittle, disturb, and even scare some students and professors. That is, their presence in the air or on the walls can move students out of the frame of mind in which they can do their best work. Students don't feel at home. They don't feel that it's their university when these ideas and feelings are bandied about, especially if they are discussed dispassionately, academically. Freedom for students, then, can have academic and personal costs for many students. That's one of the worries. Another is that ideas and attitudes harmful to people will spread if those ideas and attitudes are allowed free expression and can be matters of dispassionate investigation and discussion. That a noxious idea has been refuted is no guarantee that it will go away, and its presence threatens to infect others who will act on it. We see this worry most clearly in play in attempts by organized pro-choice groups to prevent the public discussion of abortion. On the other side then, on the one side then, we have people who see the university as a place for intellectuals to do what intellectuals do, that is, to engage in investigation, interpretation, and discussion freely and for its own sake. On the other side are those who, while they might not despise intellectual life, are vividly aware of the dangers it creates, and who would then restrict and guide it so that it will serve other goals. An intellectuals university is a place of disputation where everything, including people's identities, is up for grabs in research and discussion. But, say others, some people's identities, at least at this time and in this place, should be celebrated and protected, not discussed critically. As well, they say, all university students are entitled to pursue a university education undistractedly and in their best frame of mind. Only then, they might add, will people from historically marginalized groups be able to take their places in the professional and elite world in anything near the proper proportion. Can these two sides find mutual ground to come to a resolution? Or do the fundamental conceptions of the nature and purpose of higher education differ so greatly between them that no compromise is possible? Now let us hear from our panelists. Russell.
Thanks, Mark. Can everybody hear me? I should begin by saying that I believe the topic of academic freedom is fairly simple. It is essentially the notion that we, as academics, should not be told what to say, and that we should be free to share our academic materials with the world through academic events and journals when they are of academic merit. Despite the simplicity of academic freedoms, the matters which I intend to discuss today are more complex, and so it will be difficult to cover all the ground that I want to in the time that I have. To overcome this, I've provided a couple of handouts for circulation, and one of which is a more detailed account of my views on this subject, and the other is an important piece of evidence to illustrate the problems which I will be discussing. After drawing from my own experiences, I will propose a potential solution. The first topic I will deal with involves a distinction between academics and pseudo-academics who are serving as political operatives. I should begin by drawing attention to the fact that as things stand today, academics are controlled. Governments control universities through means of funding and chartering, and professors are managed by administrators who hold their fate in their hands. Academics must publish in journals which they do not control, and the list goes on. My main point here is that this control, which undermines academic freedom, has in fact been used to turn arts faculties into political rather than academic operations. The important thing to understand about pseudo-academics serving as political agents is that because of them, the academy now exists in such a way that its purpose is geared towards serving as a means to line students up behind politicians, who are the agents of major capitalists. The students are, of course, diverted from gaining an understanding of this fact and of other important matters. Now I will discuss my own recent encounter with this problem. During my previous semester here at SMU, I had submitted an abstract to present at a recent conference here called Playgrounds and Podiums, Contemporary Issues in Sport. The topic I had chosen to present was gender in sport, and I had taken the position that a gender categorization of athletes based on biological metrics was needed in order to ensure fairness of competition in competitive sport. I was given a very brief response saying that my submission could not be accepted, which didn't surprise me because I knew it was at odds with the politically correct views and other ideologies surrounding gender these days. When I asked why it had been refused, I got a very long-winded response, framing the conference as hyper-academic so as to justify rejecting my submission on the basis that it wasn't good enough. The organizer also criticized me for questioning why it had been rejected to begin with. The entire dialogue, as well as the abstract, is available in my handout. One of the main objections I raised was that an entirely non-academic political sports organization, a local roller derby, was allowed to present on the very same topic, but their presentation entirely lacked any research or empirical data. This was apparent also from their abstract, which was uploaded to the event's webpage, and the presentation itself was nothing more than a display of propaganda. The sharply worded exchange of emails between myself and the organizers is highly revealing of the corruption of the university in the sense which I have been describing, where achievement of academic excellence is being compromised for the sake of propagating certain ideological and political views. My freedom to present my view in an academic context was suppressed for that reason. This sort of thing is just as objectionable in the arts as it would be if it were to happen in science. Imagine, for example, an astrophysics conference whose organizers decide to exercise their power to only allow astrologers to participate. This would undermine both the field of astrophysics and the academic freedom of researchers in that field, and all the more so if every conference and every academic journal were organized by the same kind of people, who are using their power as organizers to ruin the academy and destroy academic freedom. To attempt to refute this, the concept of academic freedom must be applied very simplistically. In my own case, when I sought help in dealing with the suppression of my view at the recent conference, I was told that the organizers were acting within the boundaries of their own academic freedom, which entitles them to decide which views they want to include. I was told that although my abstract may have been rejected for bad reasons, it was not an issue of academic freedom. Now, of course, sometimes decisions must be made because people have to be cut when there are simply too many applicants, although this was probably not the case in my situation. And of course, rejection is something that has to occur in academia at times. However, if in doing so, the organizing group unilaterally suppresses one particular view in favor of political reasons, this cannot be defended as an exercise of academic freedom because it is not academic to do that. Scientists are not free to publish rubbish in the name of academic freedom because it is a freedom that must be exercised responsibly. What good is the academic freedom of economists if the only ones chosen to speak in academic fora are selected for their willingness to tell lies about the economy? Freedom of expression, as well as academic freedom, are reduced to nonsense if a person is not allowed to address those who need to be addressed. One thing I learned from my experience of having my academic work rejected in favor of propaganda is that we clearly need to have a better understanding of what rules are actually operative in academic discipline and about what rules ought to apply. It is simply outrageous to defend the power of people to suppress well-founded contributions to a subject and to put an academic veneer on propaganda and ideology, which was predominantly the case at the Playground Podiums Conference. The last topic I will discuss is now a solution-based proposal. In examining the restrictions imposed on academic freedom, we must also focus on the course system itself, combined with a failure to separate teaching from evaluation of students. A failure to have such a distinction muddles actual learning progress with other abilities, such as the ability to cram for an exam, regurgitation, memorization of uninteresting facts, knowing what kind of answers your professor will like, and etc. We can look for the methods of Oxbridge to see how to provide better for academic freedom of the students within the structure of their education. Tutors are chosen by the students, and they only argue rationally with the student. They do not award grades. There are no courses. The student is free to use any methods to achieve competence in his or her chosen field, and does not know in advance who the examiners will be, nor who will be evaluating him or her at the end of their period of study. By virtue of how the system works, the student cannot pander to the examiners, and the examiners cannot be expected to be pandered to, so both have to rely on rational criteria, which is what the educational systems and judgments of academic merit should be based on, as opposed to criteria which are influenced by ideology and politics. Thank you for your time.
Marc Heller.
Okay, so Marc talked a little bit about how academic freedom for students isn't just about what goes on campus, that it covers what's off campus, it covers social clubs, basically every aspect of the life of a student at a university. I focused more on the classroom here for my little opening remarks, but I think there'll be a lot of time during the question period to sort of get a little more specific on things. So, to begin, much like a discussion of freedom of speech, the discussion of academic freedom is never about justifying complete, unfettered freedom for students, for that would be impossible to defend without rendering the point of schooling useless. If students were completely free and unfettered by any constraints, then it would follow that if they should so choose, they could pass in a crayon drawing of a person for their fourth-year biology course and expect to pass or even do well. This, of course, is ridiculous. So the discussion must necessarily be one about how constrained students should be, and about what principles we should use to determine which constraints are appropriate and which are inappropriate. I agree with Marc that the issues concerning how much freedom students should have almost always comes down to differences concerning the nature and purpose of a university. So I'd like to begin by outlining my conception of what a university should be, and end to some of the ramifications that this has concerning academic freedom for students. Firstly, I believe that a university should hold a unique place in our educational system. That is, primary, elementary, and secondary schools, which are provided for by the federal and provincial governments, already cover the basics of the education of a person, and there are many colleges which people may choose to attend and serve the end of preparing its students for a variety of vocations. Surely no one would argue that a graduate of primary or elementary or secondary school was educated simply by virtue of having graduated from these schools and no others, which leaves unanswered the question of how to complete this project, how to create educated people. I believe that this is the unique position that a university should occupy, to fulfill the project of successful education by fostering the development of educated persons. What I'm talking about here is what is typically referred to as the liberal model of university education. Now, when I say liberal, I mean a form of education that liberates the mind from the bondage of habit and custom, which stems from the Roman and Stoic notions of education in general. But I don't mean liberal in a political sense. A university that aims to educate and not simply train its students must then foster an environment that is conducive to the sort of teaching and learning that liberates the minds of its students rather than constraining them. A program that does the latter is not an institution of education, but rather an institution of indoctrination. The purpose of a university should not be to prepare its graduates for some specific vocation, nor should it be to endow them with the basic knowledge and life skills, for there are already schools that assume this role. One cannot educate in order to liberate the minds of others by narrowly focusing on honing one set of skills or transmitting one narrowly defined body of knowledge, as these schools tend to. This means that universities need to offer a range of courses that span the whole gamut of human knowledge, and it follows that if progress is to be made, if the stores of knowledge that scholars, students, and society at large draw from is to be enlarged, then scholars and students must be permitted to examine any view that avails itself to epistemic justification. The only way to avoid turning a university into an institution of vocational training, or worse, an institution of indoctrination, is that professors, students, and administrators dedicate themselves to continually re-examine any view to either bolster the justification for it, or falsify it and move towards justifying a view that is more likely to be true. So if I'm right about the university occupying the unique role of successfully completing the formal education process by liberating the minds of its students, in short, by educating them, and it seems to follow that certain constraints should be placed on both faculty and students alike. Michael Oakeshott reminds us that the university is a place where students have the opportunity of education and conversation with their teachers, their fellows, and themselves, and where they are not encouraged to confuse education with training for a profession. So at the very least, university administrators, professors, and students need to foster an environment where professors are allowed the freedom to teach as their expertise dictates, and for students to question those views without fear of reprisal for that very questioning. This entails wide latitude in allowing students to express their views, whatever they may be. However, there may be times where expressing these views no longer becomes conducive to teaching well, a time when the discussion strays too far away from the subject at hand or becomes too personal, and professors need to be empowered to shut down such discussions, recenter the discussion, or change the focus of the discussion, unit, or course accordingly. The freedom to be free from reprisal from administrators for holding certain views carries with it the responsibility to ensure that such expression does not systematically preclude the rest of the class from participating in the discussion or from learning at all. For lack of a better way to put it, reason and truth become the censors of the university classroom. To be sure, what I'm saying is that by challenging the views of their professors and their fellow students, students may come to see that there is more to such a view than they previously thought, or they may find that the justification they have for believing their professors' or fellow students' view is wrong is not sufficiently justified, and that more evidence is required before they can mount a proper defense of their own view. And if we systematically preclude certain views from being able to be expressed either by formal or informal means, we run the risk of violating those principles that are central to the liberal model for university education. If certain views cannot be expressed in class, it may follow from that there are certain views that cannot or should not be researched, and accordingly that certain truths remain hidden and concealed from the light of reason. That is something an institution of indoctrination takes as one of its central values, and not something a liberal university or any educational institution should adopt. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think I'm the only one who doesn't have notes in front of me, so
Well, look at mine.
it should be fun. So as Mark mentioned, I'm the president here of the Student Association, and I'm here actually to listen more than to speak today, to listen to students' issues and concerns, and how do they feel inside the classroom. And since we do represent the students with the university and with the administration, and that's where we can go to the university and tell them this is how our students are being treated. On the other side, I want to talk a bit about the Student Association and how we oversee, and as Mark mentioned, as a student association, we oversee our 50+ societies on campus, and one of the important things you mentioned is the posters around campus, and this is one of the things I want to talk a bit about, and some of you might have heard about this, but 6 years ago now, and in 2012, there was a poster out there that has a gun on it. So a poster that had a gun on it, and this poster came up to the Student Association to be stamped, because whenever we're going to put a poster out around campus, you need to stamp it from the Student Association. At that time, there was a shooting in one of the schools around the area, and that's where us as a Student Association, we look at the perspective around us when we see a poster that have a gun on it. Now, did we tell the students to take the posters down? And the question is, do we have the right to tell the students to take the posters down? We stamp posters. We might do have the right. Have we ever done it? I don't think so. What happened in 2012, and that's where a discussion I want to see from it later on, where a student have a gun in the poster that's saying, join us in a society poster. And what the Student Association asked them for, why don't, there was a shooting this week, and this might be something that has attached with violence. Is there a way we can remove the gun, or is there a way we can put the gun aside so it's just not pointing at students? And we know it's the freedom of students to create the posters they want and what they believe is right, and that's where it comes when it comes to campus and their academic freedom on campus. So we asked, and part of the academic freedom is having a discussion. That's the important part, because if you say no right away, that means you are against academic freedom right away, I will tell you, because part of academic freedom, if it was outside the classroom or inside the classroom, is the opportunity to have a discussion on it. So at that time we had a discussion, and they didn't like the discussion. So right away they didn't want to change it, or they didn't want to stamp it at that time, and they went to the media and said, the Student Association asked us to take our poster down. And that's where, and I want to hear later from you, what should we do at that time? When it comes to us as a student association, as an organization, when every poster it's going to go up, is it, and that's where we go back to the main point, is if a poster gets someone offended, do we say no, like this shouldn't be up? Of course not, because you may see many posters that might get other students offended on campus for specific, but if there's a poster that is related or endorse hate speech, that's a poster where you say no, because you can't say, for example, on a poster, Islam and Christian are not religions, are not the right religion. You can do that on a poster and put it up. But you know what? You can say Islam and let's have a debate on if Islam and Christian are right religious, and that's where we stand in the middle as a student association when it comes to our posters policy, when it comes to our society. Our societies have the freedom to do whatever they want. They want to do events on campus, off campus. They have the right of freedom to do whatever they want. When it comes to the student association, we make sure first of their liability. They have the freedom to do an event they like, a theme they like, maybe a theme that other people wouldn't like, a theme like when Trump was running for elections, some people like, that's offended, why would someone do an event? But if a society came up with their students and they want to do an event, we don't, it's not about support or not support, but it's a society and they have the freedom to do that in many ways. So that's where we fall as a student association around campus, and especially when you see the posters panel around campus, it's kind of a channel of the university. It's the same as social media, it's the same as the university website, it's the same as different, because it's a channel that reaches students around campus, and that's where we look what's the right thing to have out there, and what's the limit of the academic freedom for this, or should we say, you know what, everyone can put whatever they want up there, we're not judging anyone. And it's not about judging, it's about making sure that what's up there is is not it's not the right thing I want to say, but it's not the thing that might really gets people on the other side offensive, feel that this campus is not welcome for them, because as we know, this campus has been working for many years to make it an inclusive campus for all our students here, if it was from day one welcome week or in their 4th year. And so that's the area I'm expert in. After listening for both of you, I was like, I wish I'm in philosophy, or I did some courses at least. But in general, I would like to hear more about you and how you feel here on our campus and inside our classroom and off campus if it's related to the school. Thank you.
Lindsay.
Okay, so I want to start talking about academic freedom for students on the other side of the country, so at the University of British Columbia, UBC. And something they're doing right now is they're coming up with a statement on freedom of expression, and they're going to institute this statement. And it makes sense to do this because Canadian campus culture has kind of become synonymous with platforming, stifling debate, silencing discussion. So it makes sense to institute something like this. So when they put out their draft statement, they allowed for feedback, and there's actually over 100 comments online that you can read. And I went through over 100 of them, and it's really mixed reviews. And so here's the most contentious phrase. I'll read it for you. One person's freedom of expression cannot be allowed to trample the freedom and well-being of others. So the issue that people took up with this is well-being. It's such a subjective, contentious term, right? It could mean anything. And so why it matters is, so there's a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University named David Haskell, and he has come up with the term linguistic imperialism. And what this means is that, so when you have a certain segment of society that it leans politically and ideologically one way, they're trying to redefine words in a way that suits their worldview and it conveys their worldview. So if we think of words such as mentally harmed, psychologically disturbed, unsafe space, trauma, violence, they're trying to loosen the definition so much that the power is taken away from these words. And so another way this is relevant, so as I said, I went through over 100 of the comments in response to UBC's draft statement. And there's one in particular that stood out to me, and I'll read this for you as well. The pro-life group that was set up outside the Nest for a week, and the Nest is the student commons at UBC, should absolutely not be allowed to do so. I felt uncomfortable and scared to go to school for a week as a result. Students should never, capital letters, never, feel unsafe at their own place of education. So it's loaded with an educational philosophy, sure, but what stood out to me was this person is scared to go to school for a week simply because of a pro-life display. And I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but as a human being and with experience interacting with other human beings, it's not a normal response, right? And so Jonathan Haidt from the Heterodox Academy, he kind of says that in 2015 there was a coalescing of many factors that led to this kind of campus culture. So it's a victimhood culture, it's a virtue signaling culture, changes in parenting, it led to less independent youth, as well as a kind of political and ideological monoculture of left-leaning faculty on campuses. So the reason why I care about UBC's statement is because my university, Wilfrid Laurier, is going to come out with a similar kind of project. So, and of course this was inspired by the events that transpired between me and the university. So I was accused of being transphobic under the gendered and sexual violence policy for having a discussion about gender pronouns. Okay, and so we need to think about the hierarchy of policies. So let's say Laurier made a statement thank you. Laurier made a statement that endorsed maximum freedom of expression, okay? And let's say this was instituted when I showed the clip that I did in my class. Well, at the same time, we still have the gendered and sexual violence policy. So, you know, which one would come first? Even if you say that an objectionable idea cannot be silenced, if you still have a gendered and sexual violence policy, would I still be accused under it? And so what I'm getting at here is something like sexual politics can become pro-censorship, right? And this manifests in another way as well. So also at Laurier, Danielle Robitaille, who is a lawyer who defended Gian Gomeshi in the sexual assault lawsuit, she was invited by Laurier's Criminology Students Association to come speak. But there was an advocacy group, I think it was something about Students for a Culture of Consent on campus, and they petitioned for her to not come. And so she ended up not coming. They were successful in objecting to her presence because her presence would be too triggering. So again, what I'm getting at here is academic freedom for students. Even if you have a statement of freedom of expression, it might not mean anything if the pro-censorship policies are hidden within other legal frameworks and in other regulations. So that's what we need to look out for. Thank you.
Russell, 2 minutes.
Does anybody have any questions?
Not yet.
All right.
Not yet.
Okay, fine. We're getting to that. So something else that I wanted to talk about is kind of get into. I really had to trim my speech down to be able to articulate what I wanted to in that 8 minutes that we had. But now I'm just going to speak a bit more generally about academic freedom. So in the absence of a fundamental basis of academic freedom, I think that bold thinking is discouraged and the stagnations of ideas are promoted in a classroom. If a student were to present a view on a politically charged topic which challenges the view that is deemed politically acceptable according to their institution, they may often be subject to criticism which is not academic or just an entire dismissal of their idea altogether. And this can be devastating to the student who works hard and produces high-quality work, which is undervalued, unfairly criticized, and marked with a poor grade as a result of its lack of conformity to the ideological or political stances which are being encouraged. As a result of controlled learning conditions, and in conjunction with the largely unchanged structure of our classical education system, most students cannot, or neglect to, get beyond regurgitating what they remember being taught. And the carefully executed limitations imposed on academic freedom are responsible for the present state of the academy, which, you know, I believe to be has become the epicenter of ideological and political indoctrination in developed societies. I think that this should also be the way that in which decisions are made regarding the selection of materials to be presented at academic conferences with regard to the solution that I proposed about separating the teaching from the evaluation of students. I think that if that were the case, then, you know, if it started in the university, it would extend to all academic fora, you know. And one other thing that I wanted to talk about is something that I think every student here can probably agree with me about, is examinations suck. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because actually they are exerting a severe limitation on our academic freedom. Examination papers drastically reduce the students' academic freedom by requiring that certain books and certain specific topics be studied. And thus, you know, if an institution wanted to accommodate academic freedom through their examinations, they would want to make their questions be general enough to accommodate very different study choices. And however, this is not the way things are usually done in institutions where academic freedom is misunderstood or undervalued.
Mark, 2 minutes to respond to what you've heard from your fellow panelists.
Yeah, so I want to focus on the comment from the student of the pro-life demonstrators. And I think it's a good example of what scares me about where universities are headed, in the sense that it is a perfectly defensible view to say that, you know, either A, abortion shouldn't be permitted, or that there is something morally wrong with abortion, in the same way that it is perfectly sensible and defendable to hold that it should be permitted, and that may not be, that it may be, I don't know if it is, I don't know how easy it is to defend that it's morally right, but
Yeah. Who's going to not permit it? You?
I have no idea. Just, there'll be
Okay,
some
good.
time for questions at the end.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What scares me about it is that instead of engaging with it, it seems like disengagement has become more of the norm, where instead of going in and having a conversation with these people, avoidance becomes the norm. And that's what scares me.
We're not avoiding anything. We're right here.
If you'd like to come up, then...
No,
Okay,
we want to
thank
hear
you.
what you're saying.
So what scares me is that if we start to avoid certain subjects, whether that's in class, or start to police, whether it's clubs, for not being able to discuss certain things or have clubs about certain things, what scares me is that you end up with too many people that don't want to engage, that retreat to the people who believe like them and only like them. Well, sorry.
Must be a Marxist plot.
So, you know, I think the more open we are, especially at the classroom level, in presenting these views, the more discussions we can have on them, the more exposure you get to all the views that you will find out there in the world. I think the better we are as citizens in general, and the better off we are as graduates by the time we're done here. And I think that the more and more we start to constrain it, the worse and worse off we are as people and graduates in general.
Ossama.
Great. So I will disagree and disagree at the same time. So I will agree with you about being more open to get people more engaged, and especially when it comes to clubs and societies. And if it comes to me, and I have been 2 or 3 years on the student association board, and we never turned the society away. We would never, whatever name they came up with, we would never tell them, you are not allowed to use this name. It's not even our policy, you know, that you need to use the appropriate name. And when I speak to this, I speak about when it comes to the religious society or non-religious society, to the political societies, as long as they are following the criteria that all societies are following equally. That's the point of it, where to be always open and always welcome to new societies, to engage more people on this campus. I'll disagree about the examination thing, examination part, where I will agree as a student, you know, it's fun, we don't need exams, and exams is not the fun part, stressful time of the year, but what will be the second option if there's no examination? Because from my perspective, I'm an international student here, whom I came from countries doesn't really have the freedom of speech like here. But I would say from all the papers I have wrote, if it was in psychology, if it was in commerce, if it was, I wrote my own things, I wrote my own perspective, I did my own research, and I never got the professors to tell me, you're not allowed to talk on this, or this is not the right thing to write about. I might not get the mark I want to, but I believe I did write what I want to. That was part of the academic freedom, I would say. Yeah, that's for me.
If I could just quickly respond to that. There are alternatives to examinations for evaluating students, and I discussed some of that when I was talking about the methods employed at Oxford, if you can recall.
Lindsay, 2 minutes to respond to what you've heard from the other panelists.
Yeah, sure. So, and maybe some of these things will be picked up more in the question and answer period. To Russell, to what you were saying, when you say that pseudo-academics are working as political operatives, I would challenge you on providing perhaps more evidence, like more cases. You've provided your own, but you know, I think it would need to be further elaborated on. And then to Marc, of course, you know, when you say that avoidance is becoming the norm over engaging with people, I mean, I can't agree more, right? We need to have dialogue. We need to be able to see where other people are coming from, and that's maybe not necessarily an academic freedom for students thing, but just an understanding each other as people thing, and just being honest with each other and being curious about each other. So that just appeals to humanity. And then to Ossama, so were you arguing that you shouldn't put up a poster that says Christianity and Islam are the wrong religions?
Are they wrong?
Or are they're not the right religions? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to put up a poster?
No, you should be able to have a debate about it, saying let's have a debate that Islam and religion shouldn't say it's wrong right away.
Well, I would disagree. I mean, I would say, you know, you can put up that poster, and then by virtue of putting it up, maybe then the debate and the discussion arises, right?
What about if it really didn't create that debate, or wasn't really a debate, you just want to put it as you feel that?
Well, I think they should be allowed to do so.
If I could elaborate quickly on the distinction between academics and political operatives, I think it's useful to draw another distinction between knowledge and ideology. See, knowledge is, you know, claims and descriptions about reality which are devised in an attempt to be extremely accurate to reality. Ideology is similar insofar as its claims and descriptions about reality. However, these ones are different insofar as they're not devised to be accurate, but rather to serve other political means, such as manipulate people or line them up behind politicians and etc. So I would argue that an academic is really a pseudo-academic serving as a political operative when they are teaching ideology as opposed to teaching knowledge.
Thank you. Let's thank our panelists. I'll set up our microphone. Come to the mic if you have a question. I think I know how to operate this. Oh yeah, the door's button.
Eva, yes.
Christina.
Thank you all for some very interesting, stimulating comments. My question is for Ossama?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to hear a little bit about where you are actually originally coming from. How does your experience of academic freedom, of freedom to express yourself, compare to that in Canada? Also, how is, for instance, opposition to some view handled in your country? Would it be in your country, for instance, perfectly fine to talk about the abortion issue? Those kind of things.
Thank you for your question. No, that's a really good question. I came kind of from the Middle East and kind of from a closed society, I would say, a closed society driven by religion most usually. If it was any part of religion, it's usually drove by religion, and you know, having that transition between coming from the Middle East all the way to Canada and how a free country is Canada, it's a bit of an experience, and it's always, I would say, there's always a learning process for it. It's always, you always learn something in new actually. And when I actually was doing my research on academic freedom, and you get to know more about faculty and more about students, and when Russell mentioned something about administration, you realize with time that administration doesn't really have that power of faculty. Faculty have their paper of collective agreement that that's what they are with, and that's where you got shocked as a student or as someone coming from outside, because you always believe that deans have the power to make anything they want. We always have in belief that the president of the university is the president. If he said this is wrong, and that's being honest, kind of where how it is. Where when you come here and you see how things work, it's totally different when it comes to, for sure, being union and non-union, when it comes to human rights and what are you allowed to say and what you are not allowed to say. And it's a pretty challenge, and it's a culture to learn. It's a culture to learn about our indigenous students on campus. It's a culture to learn about our LGBTQ plus on campus. You know, we came from a culture where you came here, you feel like they are all part of us, where you never thought that, and that's where you wake up a bit. You say, like, what if my friend is gay? Where in the past, where I would never thought my friend's gay, where my best friend is gay and my other best friend is lesbian. So that's amazing. And I would go back and tell my parents that. I would tell my family that, because that's how it is here, and that's how free you can be here, and that's a learning process, and it's just great to see where you came from and where you are. So yeah, that's my film.
Yes, please.
Hi, yes. I think for me, like listening to all of you was very interesting, but the one term that came from you that really stuck out, and to me, it's around this term that the whole issue of freedom of expression centers, and that's the rational factor. Like if we really, I find like, and I know there's this term like people are getting triggered, right? Like certain words, and boy, the emotion flies. And we have seen that here too, you know? I mean,
Triggered as fuck. Triggered as fuck. Yep.
And like, the rational factor. We're here to discuss things. Our whole society, Western society, is built on the rational factor. That was the Enlightenment. That's what it was about. We got away from burning witches at the stake, because at one point they really believed it. You know, and so it has developed. And so, for instance, when it was said, well, academic freedom cannot be anything because you know, then it could be like crayon paintings. No, that's not even the issue, crayon paintings. It's because crayon paintings are not rational. It's the rational factor. So it really doesn't matter like what the issue is. If you go with it, with your mind, then it should be able to be dealt with, because it's innate in us to know what the truth is, and we know when we lie to each other. That's one thing. Just like, and then I want to say, with this, what Lindsay was saying about, you know, like these terms, and people are getting so sensitive, and safe spaces, and for instance, at Harvard, and that's true, and that's there is Harvard Law School. The term rape cannot be used. And in law school, the whole thing, rape, yeah, because it triggers women. So there you have lawyers now being educated at Harvard, one of the elite schools, and they won't have a clue about rape because they can't deal with it. So this is where we are getting to. Like, this is Harvard, and they're setting an example. Next time we can say whatever, and then what's left? So what I think is, and the same with the issue with, can I be for this religion or not? Let's talk it out rationally. But you see, I think what's happening is that people just get it, they're so emotionally that it gets, you know, the whole issue, I don't know, then it becomes like, who has the louder voice? But
thanks.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Marc begin, because you referred to a point that he made, but I think you misunderstood his point.
Oh, okay.
Marc? Because you're against, you say no crayons.
Yes, that's right.
No, I understood that. No, I just wanted to say, to juxtapose crayon painting to academic freedom wasn't quite right. I know where you were, but because that's out of the academic realm. You know, as long as things are academic, I think they should be allowed. And you know I come from.
No, let's let Marc.
But that's like, if we're talking about, you know, constraints that we place upon students, that's one of them. One of the constraints is you cannot simply write about. Okay, so let's just take the biology class example. As a student in a biology class, the constraints that are placed upon you have to do with that discipline in general. So that doesn't mean that you can't write about, oh, I don't know, some political matter, so long as it can be tied into whatever the assignment was. If the assignment was to talk about the human digestive system, sure, maybe there's an analogy in there to some political issue, something pithy, but you know, if you hand in a paper that's more appropriate in a political science classroom, you shouldn't expect to get a passing mark for that because you just wrote a political science You know what I mean? So like that's what I'm saying, is that simply by virtue of being a student, you agree to there being certain constraints on what you can and can't do insofar as what you can write about. But, you know, if we're talking about biology and you wanted to write a paper, if it was an open assignment, write a paper on something related to what we've talked about this year, and you wanted to write a paper on why you don't believe that our conception of the sexes are appropriate, that there are only males and only females, absolutely. But it can't be pure conjecture. You're going to have to find evidence to justify your view. You're going to, and maybe to your point there, have to speak about it rationally. And same thing if you wanted to take the opposing view.
I just wanted to quickly touch on your point about the word rational, because I agree with you that it is a key word here. And I think there are two distinct interpretations of the word rational which come into play. The first of which is the one that we should be working with in a university, where rational means well-founded or well-reasoned. Now, the second of which is another applicable meaning of the word rational, means something more to the effect of in line with our goals, right? We could say that something was rational if it was in line with our goals. Now, lots of the things that we might be teaching in university are rational in the sense that they're in line with some goal, but that doesn't mean that they are well-founded or well-reasoned and should be part of the curriculum or the syllabus.
Yes, so when I mean rational, it was of course more like logical, right? And I know, for instance, that in the past at universities, logic.
Okay, very quickly.
Very quickly. The course in philosophy, logic, was actually mandatory, and there used to be full auditoriums. Full auditoriums. But now, nobody wants to take logic anymore. And I think, in order to solve these problems, I think logic should become mandatory again, and then we can talk about it.
Ossama, did you want to respond to these remarks?
No.
Okay, Lindsay, did you have anything to add? No? Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Ifo. I am Isoko. Some people from Europe thought that it was rational to invade, kidnap, enslave, and bring people to this land. Then they thought that it was rational to commit genocide on indigenous peoples. Then they thought that it was rational to set up residential schools. And right now we have more native kids in care in this country than they did in the height of residential school. So if this is the example of a bastion of rational, I want irrational. Now, tied into that idea of Western nationality is the idea of Nazi ideology. The idea that there is one way that is supreme, which is usually the white way, and then whatever it is that people say that are from different cultural backgrounds or understanding are now considered irrational or infantile. Like when our ancestors talked about the need to respect the earth and to love each other, and that we're all brothers and sisters and that we're all family. White people, still today, consider that irrational and childish, which is why there's so much money in the Western world spent on weapons of mass destruction. Like Halifax is manufacturing weapons to kill people. So I don't want you guys to talk about rational until the West becomes rational.
Okay.
So I just have to respond to that because that was fundamental white supremacy. So now, you can discuss issues of rape without actually, or sexual assault mentioned the word rape. So that is actually logically incorrect. Now, my question is this. You talk about freedom. People that enslave people like me are talking about freedom. You haven't paid reparations yet. You haven't returned the land that you're stolen. How can you talk about freedom? Well, let's get more precise. Freedom for white people would mean that Nazis can freely organize in St. Mary's and put up posters so they can continue to hunt people that look like me. That's not freedom. They say with freedom comes responsibility. What the white, alt-white wants is freedom without responsibility. You're not responsible for the shit that you say, and when we come to actually have logical questions for you about the implications of what you're saying, or the fact that the alt-right and all these Nazi groups are following you in masses, you're like, hey, we have nothing to do with it. So you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. So my question is, what is your response to the fact that the stuff that you're saying that you think is rational and good for the betterment of society is leading to people like me being under increasing attack from the alt-right, from the Proud Boys, from the people who did shit in the States, from all this nonsense? I have to ask you, where's your responsibility for the stuff that you're putting out and what it's doing to this society that you claim to be free? And I want to hear your answer.
Well, to be honest, I think your view is precisely the result of an absence of rationality in our education system. You're just regurgitating a bunch of ideological nonsense, highly incoherent.
Is there one thing that I said that was incorrect?
Collective guilt is unjustifiable. That's the thing. No one has to feel guilty, pal. Just asking you to recognize
Yes,
your
yes.
privilege.
Respond to Russell and then we'll...
That's what matters. You're assuming my
Respond to Russell.
Do you want to see my ID? I'm first nation.
Okay.
Quiet, please.
Okay, you claim that there was no rationality in what I said. I'm actually a computer scientist, so I study logic. So I'm going to ask you to answer logically. Let's even use Western European logic, which is binary. Hold on, I'm talking to you, okay? You say freedom. You're getting triggered?
I'm getting scared.
Chill out. So can you answer the question logically? Is there anything that I said that was incorrect?
Again, I think that...
No, just name one thing that I said that was incorrect.
I think that the view that you hold is a result of
Bullshit,
ideological biases that are ingrained in the education system.
Okay, so obviously you can't answer it because I'm wrong. And you, what's your response to this nonsense that you're saying?
Other panelists? Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, the things you say, I completely agree that they're horrendous. Who doesn't? And, you know, Proud Boys alt-right.
Yeah.
Quiet.
I disavow what they do. And so when you say that what I said she did, why let her talk?
Like so, ever in a public setting besides today.
Yeah, someone Facebooking live.
Weird.
Say you denounce the Mike Sonovich and the Proud Boys. Say you denounce them right now. Say it.
Sure, just let us speak.
Okay.
So, just going back to what you were saying earlier, in the 8 minutes of what I said, what did you find about it that appeals to the alt-right, or that would appeal to those groups and incite violence?
You're seriously asking that question after the number of followers that you have?
No, what I just said now. Weren't we talking about what I just said?
Oh, you responded to Ossama when he talked about the need to have respectful freedom, which means love, right? So if you know something is fundamentally hurtful to somebody else, the loving response, if you're a decent human being, that your parents taught you how to respect other people, is not to willingly do stuff that will incite hatred or will lead to the death of people like me. That's if you're a decent human being. Now, if you want to argue that rationality is Nazi ideology, you should just kill people if you feel like killing people, that's a different conversation. And if that is your stance and you stand with the Nazis, that's okay, at least be honest. But don't be disingenuous and say this stuff. Because you're not a 2-year-old, you know what you're saying. If you claim that you're rational.
Next question, please.
Apparently I'm not. You have to answer.
Well, she did.
No. She said, she asked me what was it that was problematic, and I told her exactly what it was. Was your response to Ossama that you just want freedom to do whatever you want, including inciting the killing of people like me? That is the logical conclusion. So you're talking about logic.
No,
so can you answer the question?
We have Nazi Twitter followers.
Can you answer the question?
Nazi Twitter followers.
Yes.
You stepping in her defense.
Nazi Twitter
Saluting in her
defense.
defense.
Quiet, please.
Doesn't matter.
Lindsay, do you have anything more to say, or shall we move on?
I'm not a Nazi, and I don't like Nazis, and I disavow what they do. And I don't...
Next, no.
Someone said he's not racist, so that's
Well, there's no winning there.
Thank you.
My question is directed towards the comments on how we're becoming a culture of avoidance. So in response to the example that you used of pro-lifers protesting, let's say for example on campus or somewhere public like a facility like a school, although I agree that these conversations are something that needs to happen, I feel like they need to happen in a safe space and where people are willing to be vulnerable enough to talk about these things. if we allow people to come and make that kind of protest and tell people what they are and are not allowed to do with their bodies, make them feel attacked and oppressed, they are not going to feel comfortable. They are going to feel in danger. And if someone is feeling in danger, how do you expect them to have a rational conversation with somebody? If someone is coming up to me and telling me that I don't have rights to my own body, that I don't get to decide what to do with my body should I become pregnant, I feel endangered. I feel oppressed and I feel attacked. And that is not a place that I can be to have any kind of conversation with someone that is going to result in anything positive.
Yeah, no,
Mark?
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but what I wonder is, can the classroom be that place?
Well, that depends on who we have facilitating it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what that speaks to more than anything is that just because you've got a PhD, just because you are incredibly knowledgeable, and I assure you, in order to end up at that place, you have to be, doesn't mean you're going to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
And if there is something we can do to make the classroom, you know, when I say a safe place, I don't mean a place free from offense or feeling uncomfortable. I think that that's part and parcel of what it means to be able to talk about these things. But you're right, I think it does take the right kind of person to do that. I think it takes a good teacher to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I want the classroom to be that place, but it does mean that it's going to put you in a position where you're going to have that uncomfortable conversation. And that is what I want, not because I want you to feel endangered, or anybody for that matter regarding any subject matter. It's because this is not a view that we are necessarily going to get rid of. There are so many political and moral things tied up with abortion. You're always going to have somebody who thinks that, maybe even on rational grounds, that it should not be permitted. But I think by allowing that to come to the fore in the classroom, you get to see one of two things. Number one, that your opponents, the people with whom you disagree, might actually have a good point or two. Or number two, your opponents believe not on the basis of evidence, but believe on the basis of a whole variety of other things. Maybe it's tied in with their family's beliefs. Maybe it's tied in with their religious beliefs. So it's not just that they believe these things or refuse to believe that you're right, or refuse to agree with your position on abortion on evidential grounds. They do it because if they repudiate those things, they repudiate their family, their friends, all of the things that they take to be valuable in this world. So the argument becomes a heck of a lot more difficult, because now it's going to be hard to try and dissuade them of that view, because it's based on so many other things than just evidence. Right. At the very least, you get a chance to see what is behind this view that you disagree with.
Right, but we're not talking about apples and oranges here. We're talking about people's existence.
Mm-hmm.
And when we set up a platform where we allow alt-right fascists and Nazis allowed to perpetuate hate speech and gather more followers.
I think the question's been asked. I want to hear if Ossama and Lindsay have responses. No? But Ossama, could I ask, what if a pro-life group wanted to organize among the students and wanted to demonstrate on campus?
I would agree with you on having a safe place. This university should be a safe place and a welcome place for the 7,000 students who are here. If these discussions inside the classroom will really make students, and I'm not talking about make students offended or they don't like the topic of it, but if it's really gonna make them feel that they're not safe to be in this university, that means I'm not sure where is the other place to be safe other than home. So it shouldn't be there in classroom if it makes students unsafe.
Russell,
well, I mean, what we're basically talking about here is just whether or not people should be able to present a view on something. It happens to be abortion in this case, and I can recall in grade 10, you know, we staged debates about a variety of topics, including abortion, and nobody got upset, you know, it was simply an exercise in argumentation. So what I want to suppose here is, can we not expect a higher degree of intellectual maturity in the university setting? Should students not be prepared to engage in ideas which they might find a little unsettling? If they're not, what are we doing here?
We currently live in a time of extreme rising violence against people and minorities. That has been something that has been coming out of the woodwork for a long time and has very much made itself known.
Okay, thanks. We're going to move to the next question.
I just have one last,
very quick.
Finish my sentence.
Sure.
If you want to look at history and look at how all those organizations that actually caused violence and death were formed, this is what it looked like. Yeah. They put up posters, they made clubs, they got followers. We allowed them to create propaganda that led to the harm and death of many minorities. Okay. And we're just saying, okay, that's cool, like, let's do that again.
Your point's made. Next questioner. Next questioner, please.
Differentiating traits between human and fetus.
Posters, speaking of the posters. And basically, my question is, as I listened, I wanted to say that, is that?
Yeah, it's a bit better.
I wanted to say that in listening and thinking in terms of a broader discussion, philosophy is not a science. I think it's a framework of ideas and that it can be very strong. And what about logic?
I don't even think science is a science.
Pardon me?
I don't even think science is a science, but that's just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
But going further than that, I think what's happening is that in part of the discussion of freedom of speech, we are opening things up in ways that are unwholesome in terms of we allow bigotry to creep in as a notion of free speech, and this is dangerous. And what I want to know is, from each of you, I would be very curious to know, where do you think there is the line between bigotry and selling us some kind of a strange notion of free speech that allows that kind of discussion to happen? I'm totally comfortable with opening ideas and having discussions that are uncomfortable or that push the envelope, okay, but bigotry has no place as a notion.
Okay.
Now, what
thank
do you think
you for the question.
There you go.
Who wishes to respond?
Because
Ossama, do you have a... Yeah.
Oh,
no, one second, let us...
No, and in my opinion, I would say the line of the difference is between the freedom of speech goes away when it becomes hate speech. That's where the freedom of speech is not the right freedom of speech. When it becomes a hate speech, that you are targeting a group or targeting audience or targeting students, that's where it's not the right freedom of speech.
So that is the intersect of free speech that needs to be talked about and evolved and focused on, because allowing people to disguise or use bigotry as a way of shaping free speech is not acceptable. So where is that line?
Mark, did you want to address this point?
Yeah, I don't know.
I got
But Russell then. Russell's got something.
So, I mean, I think a question we all need to ask ourselves is, without a free academy where ideas can be challenged and created and destroyed through, you know, the processes of academic freedom being exerted, how are we ever going to be able to devise reasonable criteria for what constitutes bigotry to begin with?
Lindsay, did you want to say anything to this point?
What is your definition of bigotry? What is yours?
Okay,
no.
Let's go on.
Yes, Lindsay, did you want to respond to this question?
Well, just exactly what's going on here right now is another example of linguistic imperialism, right? I could add that to the list, bigotry. It's subjective.
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of the
attention here.
But is it
next question then?
What's wrong about it though?
Next question.
Is that like
no?
you have to have
What are the microphone if you want to ask a question?
You guys have said some amazing things. I just have one question to take the conversation further. We've talked a lot about academic freedom and its benefits, but I'm wondering, in your opinion, what are some of the consequences that a lack of academic freedom may have on the individual intellectual in the university space?
Here, Mark, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd say, I can't remember who said it, but it's something about education, university education attending to the individual as a whole. The idea being that it would be hard to call somebody educated if by the end of their education we couldn't say that they were somehow better off than they were before that. So what I worry about for constraints going too far is getting to a point where you aren't better off than you were before, that you haven't grown in some sense through these 4 years or however long it may be. So there's that, and I think, so yeah, I guess I talked a little bit about like constraining an individual, like, constraining an individual's mind versus trying to expand it. So that's what I worry about. If we say there are certain no-go areas, and maybe there are, and so like in response to that question there, where do you draw the line? I don't know where to draw the line. I know that I hold certain principles about what a university is and should be, but I'm not sure beyond an individual basis where that line is to be drawn. But what I do want to make sure is that by the end of this, everybody who's taken part of it has an opportunity to say that they've grown as an individual, as opposed to further entrenching themselves into their already held beliefs.
Lindsay, I thought you wanted to respond. Ossama.
I think the lack when it comes to academic freedom falls under different aspects. As Mark mentioned, you know, we are in an open education university where we need to have discussions. We should have discussions, because it's not always what's inside the book that's right. You know, we always, and that's part of your university experience when it comes to having discussion, which was a group discussion or a class discussion. And the lack of academic freedom will just take all this experience from what it means to be educated, or for what it means to have a bachelor in the university, whatever degree you have. So that's what I believe.
I've written on this topic, so I'll say something if you don't mind. I'm not a panelist, but if the point of the university is to help people express moral and intellectual autonomy, and to develop so that they have moral and intellectual autonomy, then that means that they're believing and valuing for their own good reasons. If they're constrained, if they're not able to exercise academic freedom, freedom of discussion, freedom of expression, freedom of determination, then they lose that. So even if they value correctly, and even if they believe truly, they're not valuing correctly or believing truly for the right reasons. They're believing truly because of the constraints that force them to, and they're valuing correctly because of the constraints. To be educated is to believe and value for your own good reasons, and part of that is, what's required for that is an atmosphere of freedom. And without that atmosphere, your beliefs and values aren't truly your own.
But isn't education part of addressing some boundaries or some limits of...
That's indoctrination or training, I would think.
Well, is it or...
Well, I think we should go.
Yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm not on the panel. Forgive me. Russell wanted to finish.
Yeah, your question was, it was regarding what are some effects we might observe when academic freedom is being limited. Am I getting that right? Well, one effect which I have observed is that, you know, students, particularly in the arts, like the humanities and the social science courses, are being required to study substandard works that have made it onto the syllabus only because of their status as a classic or for some other cause apart from academic merit. Because I think, you know, academic freedom is importantly related to the concept of the principle of academic merit, right? And you know, the idea that academic merit has to do with the solution to some sort of intellectual problem. you know, and we're promoting a lot of texts that really just create a shroud of confusion, rather than you know, shedding light on the kinds of problems which we're concerned with. You know, we're reading stuff that's out of date. We're still spending a lot of time on thinkers that existed, like, you know, before most recorded history existed. You know, and it's like, you know, these people were thinking or trying to think about stuff before logic was even really invented as a discipline. Why are we spending so much time on these kinds of thought? You know, it just, you know, the control of the academy to a large extent is in the hands of ideologues who organize things to promote their ends of, you know, making heaven on earth, or instilling the correct attitudes in students. And, you know, these are the people that also organize the classroom and the academic events as well as the programs of study.
Next question, please. Thank you.
How is that not a conspiracy theory?
I'd first of all say that it's not a conspiracy theory because it happens to everyone, and Lindsay Shepherd is actually a staple of that. It's the fact that academia is corrupted.
Lindsay, right here. Biggest fan.
I think I'd be kind of scared if my university tried to censor me for showing a TVO clip in class. I'm sorry, but that seems wrong. And the fact that all of this seems to be a conflation between freedom of speech and Nazism is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah!
Actually stood for liberal ideals would be ashamed of you entirely. And I guess I actually just wanted to address Ossama's point, because you guys had sort of a little debate about where you should draw the line when it comes to a poster. So could I get you to reiterate where you think the line is?
Yeah, when it turns to be a hate speech, when it turns to be there's no discussion. So you just wanna target a group without telling them, let's sit on a table and have discussion, because part of academic freedom is having a free discussion, and that's what the line for me.
The problem with that logic is that how do you define targeting? How do you define targeting?
So you told me you're a First Nation, right?
I am partially First Nation.
Yeah, you're a First Nation. Would you like someone to come and have a poster that disrespect First Nation in many ways, and they want to put the poster up, but they don't want to sit with you and discuss it? They don't want to face you and sit in front of you and tell you this is what we believe. Would you, as a student, if you're a student here at St. Mary's, would you like to be walking to your class and see that poster right next to your class that disrespect you, disrespect your family, and disrespect your nation?
Well, I think first of all we need to make, like Peterson actually pointed out.
I'm just asking.
No,
you want to answer my question?
There's many conflations within what you're saying, right? So what we need to understand is that, and as philosophy majors would understand, there are qualitative distinctions between ideologies, right? So you said that you shouldn't be able to write down that Islam isn't the right religion or Christianity isn't the right religion, but you say that they should be allowed to discuss it.
To debate.
Okay, well, just make your point quickly, because we want to get to the line. Yeah, thanks, sir.
To have a debate about it, yeah, for sure. That will be.
But
that's part of the experience, you know, to sit.
If that debate is subsequently on the same thing that the poster has, then what's the difference?
If you feel like you are getting attacked or offended by that poster, you will go and show your respect.
Next question, please.
You're not being attacked.
Yeah. Next question, please.
So I just have a few questions for the panelists. Yes or no questions. Do you agree that freedom of speech, the definition of which is freedom to express yourself without restriction? Yes or no?
You said freedom of speech, correct?
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, so freedom of speech is the freedom to unrestrictedly speak. Yes, that's what it means.
Okay, so I could express my views tonight on black culture or abortion from a pro-life stance.
Well, that's not our topic.
I could speak that anywhere.
That's not our topic.
No, but I mean, I would be able to do that, though, without censorship.
In a free speech zone, yes, you would.
Free speech zone?
Or
a free speech zone, what is that?
This is a free speech zone.
I'm sorry.
Do you have a question that we can
so
get
I
our...
was answering these yes or no questions. Do you have any friends or acquaintances who are Nazis?
Well, can we move to the next question, please? We know the answer.
We don't know the answer. The topic is freedom of expression in academia, right?
Yeah. No, well, it's academic freedom, yes.
Academic freedom. So
yes.
Defined by the freedom of speech principle.
You know that the Nazis weren't in favor of academic freedom, right?
But
there's all that sarcasm.
Hello, I just have a quick comment and then a question for our student body president. I don't really want to hear from the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Lindsay, last month you tweeted, many people seem to think that just because I question or criticize someone's words, it automatically means I want them silenced. Couldn't it be further from the truth? I believe people should say what they please, no matter how disrespectful. To me, that constitutes advocating for hate speech. Now, my question to the student body president. If, say, it wasn't Lindsay who came to the freedom speech, but maybe Richard Spencer, would you be sitting there having a debate with Richard Spencer, allowing him on campus, having a panel and everything?
Would you mind if I ask you who was Richard Spencer?
He's a white supremacist.
No, I wouldn't.
Lindsay, did you want to respond?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because this person had their face covered, so it's almost like I could argue this is like an unsafe.
And he's walking away.
Well, there's a lot of Nazis here today, so.
I could.
Did you want to say something, Lindsay?
Yeah, no, like, I mean, just, I could argue this is an unsafe space for me, but, you know, I'm kind of relying on the principle that these people know that they're damaging the mission of what they're trying to accomplish, because I believe in the non-ideologically infiltrated version of social justice. And it's sad to me that these people damage what it's about. It's really sad to me.
Question, please.
I have a question. It is rhetorical, and it is heavier than an issue of speech. If I were to become pregnant and were legally forced to give birth, am I free?
Do any of the panelists want to respond? Apparently, it's clear no. I
mean, it's off topic, but my personal answer would be no. But
you're not free.
I still think a rational discussion can be had about, you know, the pro-life argument as well as the pro-choice argument. I myself am pro-choice. I do have, like, you know, sympathetic feelings towards some certain views on the pro-life side, because, you know, I do think at a certain point the fetus, you know, should probably be considered more human than, you know, just a bunch of cells. It depends, you know, how late it is in the pregnancy.
For example, the protest, it wasn't an academic discussion. People affected by the discussion weren't given the choice to engage in it, they were forced to.
Well, I was just trying to bring it back to the topic of
topic at hand.
Bringing it back to the topic and actually bringing it back to this issue that was raised multiple times of political actors within the university, I think it's important to confront that and name that directly, and name the presence of right-wing and reactionary political actors within the university. I think exemplary of this, I want to raise the question of why, for example, did the president of the hosts of tonight's event find it necessary to speak out defending the right of dental dentistry students to make threatening comments about raping their females fellow students, whereas failed miserably to come to the defense of, say, Mr. McCon. We see again and again this pattern. Lindsay, in particular, you were quite explicit about not defending the students. Freedom of speech on Twitter. The tweets there, anyone can read it and decide for themselves. I'm still asking a question, please. So I'd like you to speak to the issue. You've talked about political actors, and talked about the necessity to engage directly. Do you mean a particular type of political actor? Is this a particular ideological persuasion you're concerned with? Is there this coded, we're concerned about left academics that has run through this? And are you yourselves on the political right? I would argue that playing ball with Faith Gouldy, a noted white supremacist, probably puts you on the right, even when you're calling yourself into social justice.
Okay.
That's called bullshit.
So can I say, just for the record, I published an article in defense of Ossama Nasrallah. Go ahead.
Yes, and I also... I also... I complete...
wants to make a statement. So why don't you just move on?
Yeah, we can if you want, Lindsay.
No, I mean, I do want to say for the record that I completely defend what Musuma Khan says. Of course, she has the right to express whatever she wants on social media. The administration also came after me for what I posted on social media. But you're conflating what I said. So the reason is I was compared to Musuma Khan on many occasions in many editorials. And, one of the questions was, why do I have such a larger following than she does? And, something that was brought up was her race and religion, and that's a valid point, completely valid. But, anyway, yeah.
Next question, please.
Left academic, is this actually what you're talking about?
No, we have someone at the mic.
Political actors, I think that was directed towards me. I want to say I don't think it is about left or right. I think it's just about lining people up behind politicians so that who are serving as the agents of the finance capitalists that are running things. I honestly think that it's just, about maintaining the control, and that's why these political operatives are being instituted into institutions of education to put an academic veneer over the propaganda. It's just to serve as a means to just keep the march of tyranny rolling. So I don't think it is about left or right.
Next question, please.
Okay.
Yeah, the microphone's gone down.
So I'd like to
Don't throw it though.
I'd like to press you a bit more on the idea of ideologues, what you've categorized as, I think, ideologues.
Well, this will be the last question, by the way, because we're out of time. We go upstairs and talk.
Right.
We have the room rented for a certain time.
The idea of ideologues versus academic freedom, right? Or people who advocate for academic freedom. I want to know what, without sort of the politics, which are subjective and wrong or whatever, what does an academic course look like? What does it look like?
Well, okay, Russell.
Very quickly, the rigorous pursuit of knowledge through application of empirical research, well-founded reasoning, and, articulate methodology.
Yeah, but it's when the questions become more abstract than orange and orange is orange. That kind of empirical data doesn't mean as much without interpretation.
Then we refer to the well-founded reasoning and conceptual analysis through logical application.
Who's well-founded?
My question is what do these debates look like when they're not political, I guess?
Mark, did you want to answer?
No.
Respond.
Exactly.
What do academic debates look like if they're not political?
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that except to say, coming from philosophy, so long as the course in question isn't the philosophy of politics, because then it probably will involve some political talk. But what I mean is trying to present a view. So let's just take this as an example. Let's say I'm a member of the
just to make it more clear. How do you empirically define what is or is not bigotry?
Okay,
because the word means something, and we all know that it means something. Yeah. But how do you go out and collect data, and then what well-reasoned criteria are you using to define which evidence or arguments matter and which ones don't, if it's not in some way a political or at least a value-based understanding of that concept?
Okay, right? But when you say subjective, do you mean something about which...
Very quickly, Mark, we gotta go.
Do you think that just because something is subjective that it's based on emotions or just some conjecture? Or when you say subjective, do you mean something about which we just don't have an objective answer for? Something it can't be proven. That's what I...
Yeah, does that fall off the syllabus because it can't be objectively answered?
No, absolutely not.
And then what happens?
You know, so I mean, it's a matter of epistemology, whether or not there is such a thing as objective knowledge at all, whether all knowledge is subjective.
Yeah.
So
we go down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. And it's a deep, and it's a dark rabbit hole. And yeah, you could argue it doesn't go anywhere. I say it does go somewhere, but after 2,000 years, probably haven't come up with any certain answers yet.
You'll get baby rabbits. Anyone else want to? Okay. Oh, very quickly, yes.
Thanks. Just a quick question.
A couple minutes later.
Lindsay and Blazer guy. According to the arguments put forth by you and your supporters such as Mike Stonovich, lead organizer of the Unite the Right neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, there is a subversive, politically motivated plot to infiltrate Western academia and other Western institutions. This delusion is known as cultural Marxism. I would like you to elaborate on this idea and what it means to you.
Do you want to respond? Lindsay, I have nothing to say about it. I have no idea.
I really don't know what to say about that.
Well, the video that Lindsay showed to her students was a Jordan Peterson video, and I believe he is a huge proponent of cultural Marxism ideology and the fact that it exists at all.
He's against it.
No, that's what I'm saying. He believes in a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory.
No.
It's a conspiracy theory invented by literal Nazis. Go Google. You don't believe me? Google on your phones right now, everybody. Google cultural Marxism.
Google's always right.
No, but I guess these folks are right though.
Well, if we learned anything about the Shepherd case, I think we could at least give some credence to the idea that, you know, there is some ideologues that are operative in the institutions. After all, people were accusing Lindsay Shepherd of being some kind of agent of Peterson's, because, you know, of course he's sneaky like that, right?
Well, no, but the Marxists are sneaky like that, right?
Well, we're out of time.
Mark, they're hiding on your bed, right? They're coming after you, coming to get your kids. Communists are coming. Ooh.
Thank you very much for attendance, and we're there's a reception on the 4th floor of the Sobey building. The cheese and crackers are free, the wine isn't. Thank you very much for coming.
Actually, at least have the courage to name what you're talking about.